A secret meeting about you just ended in tears. Do not scroll away just yet. There are moments in life when you discover that not every battle happens in front of you. Some conversations take place behind closed doors. Some opinions are formed without your presence. Some people decide who they think you are before they have ever understood your heart. If you have ever felt misunderstood, overlooked, or quietly judged, this message is for you. Perhaps you have spent nights wondering why certain doors suddenly closed. Why someone's attitude toward you changed without explanation. Why opportunities disappeared. Why people who once smiled at you began treating you differently. Those questions can leave a deep mark on the heart. The Bible never promises that followers of God will never be misunderstood. In fact, many of the people God used most powerfully experienced rejection, false accusations, and hidden opposition before they saw restoration. Joseph's brothers spoke about him before he ever stood in Egypt. Daniel faced people who secretly looked for reasons to destroy him. David was criticized long before he wore a crown. Jesus himself was judged by people who misunderstood his mission. So if you have experienced hidden conversations or quiet opposition, you are not alone. What matters is not every word spoken about you. What matters is who has the final word over your life. Sometimes we become exhausted trying to defend ourselves against every misunderstanding. We replay conversations in our minds. We imagine what we should have said. We wish people could see our intentions instead of assuming our motives. But there comes a point when God gently reminds us that our identity cannot be built on the changing opinions of people. It must rest in Him. People may misunderstand your silence. They may mistake patience for weakness. They may confuse humility with insecurity. They may assume they know your story simply because they witnessed one chapter. But God sees the chapters nobody else has read. He knows every prayer whispered after midnight. Every tear hidden behind a smile. Every act of obedience that nobody applauded. Every decision to forgive when revenge seemed easier. That kind of faithfulness is never wasted. Sometimes God works quietly. Not because He is absent, but because He is accomplishing something deeper than immediate recognition. Think about Joseph. He did not control the conversations his brothers had about him. He could not stop the betrayal. He could not prevent being sold. Yet years later, he looked back and recognized something remarkable. God had been working through circumstances that once looked completely hopeless. What others intended for harm became part of a greater purpose. That truth still encourages believers today. Not because every painful situation immediately makes sense, but because God is able to bring redemption even from what was meant to wound us. Maybe you are in a season where you feel forgotten. Maybe your work goes unnoticed. Maybe your kindness has been misinterpreted. Maybe someone has spoken unfairly about you. Maybe your reputation has suffered because people believed only one side of a story. Those experiences hurt. Scripture never tells us to pretend pain isn't real. Instead, it reminds us that God is near to the broken-hearted. He knows what it feels like to be rejected. He understands what injustice feels like. And He invites us to place our burdens in His hands rather than allowing bitterness to take root. That is not easy. Forgiveness rarely feels natural. Trust often feels difficult. Patience can seem impossible when answers are delayed. Yet those very seasons often become places where our faith grows strongest. Not because suffering itself is good, but because God meets people even there. There is something powerful about choosing integrity when nobody is watching. About telling the truth when lying would be easier. About refusing revenge even when you feel justified. About continuing to love when your heart has been disappointed. Those choices rarely receive immediate applause. But they shape who we become. And character matters. Much more than temporary approval. If people have spoken about you unfairly, remember this. You cannot control every conversation. You cannot correct every rumor. You cannot force everyone to understand you. But you can choose how you respond. You can choose honesty. You can choose grace. You can choose wisdom. You can choose faithfulness. Those decisions are always within your reach. David understood this. Long before becoming king, he experienced criticism from people who doubted him. Even his own family overlooked him. Yet God saw what others missed. When Samuel visited Jesse's house, everyone expected one of David's older brothers to be chosen. But Scripture reminds us that people look at outward appearance while God looks at the heart. That truth still matters today. God sees beyond appearances. Beyond popularity. Beyond public opinion. Beyond social status. He sees the heart. That should encourage anyone who feels invisible. Because the world often celebrates what is loud. God often works through what is faithful. Faithfulness rarely trends. Integrity rarely becomes viral. Humility often goes unnoticed. Yet heaven values those things deeply. Maybe nobody thanked you for choosing honesty. Maybe nobody noticed your sacrifice. Maybe nobody recognized the battles you quietly fought. God did. Nothing escapes His attention. Every act of kindness. Every sincere prayer. Every difficult decision to obey. Every moment you chose compassion instead of resentment. Those moments matter. Not because they earn God's love, but because they reflect a heart shaped by Him. Sometimes healing begins when we stop asking why everyone misunderstood us. Instead we begin asking, Lord, what kind of person are you helping me become through this season? That question changes everything. Because suddenly the focus shifts. Not from controlling others, but from allowing God to shape our own hearts. Joseph became wiser. David became more dependent on God. Esther became courageous. Daniel remained faithful. None of them avoided hardship. But God remained present through it. Perhaps that is what someone reading this needs to remember today. God's presence is not measured by how easy life feels. Sometimes He is doing His deepest work during the seasons we understand the least. Waiting is difficult. Silence can be painful. Delayed answers can test our faith. Yet throughout Scripture, waiting often prepared people for responsibilities they could not yet imagine. Abraham waited. Sarah waited. Joseph waited. Moses waited. David waited. Even the disciples waited. Waiting did not mean God had forgotten them. It became part of their preparation. If you are waiting today, perhaps your story is still unfolding. Perhaps God is building endurance. Perhaps He is developing wisdom. Perhaps He is opening doors that are not yet visible. That does not erase present pain. But it offers hope. Because hope reminds us that today's chapter is not necessarily the final one. There is another important truth. Not everyone who misunderstands you is your enemy. Sometimes people simply have incomplete information. Sometimes assumptions replace conversations. Sometimes fear influences judgment. Sometimes hurt people hurt others. Recognizing this does not excuse wrongdoing. But it can soften our hearts enough to forgive. Forgiveness does not mean pretending something never happened. It means refusing to allow another person's actions to control your future. That freedom matters. Because resentment is heavy. Bitterness is exhausting. Constantly replaying old wounds steals today's peace. God invites us toward something better. Toward healing. Toward wisdom. Toward trust. Toward peace that does not depend on everyone's approval. Jesus demonstrated this beautifully. Many misunderstood Him. Many falsely accused Him. Many rejected Him. Yet He continued speaking truth with love. He never built His identity around public opinion. His identity rested in His relationship with the Father. That remains an example for every believer today. You cannot build lasting peace on changing opinions. People change. Crowds change. Popularity changes. God's character does not. That is why Scripture continually points us back to Him. Not because life becomes easy, but because He remains faithful even when circumstances fluctuate. Maybe today you need permission to stop carrying burdens that were never yours. You do not have to convince everyone. You do not have to answer every criticism. You do not have to chase every misunderstanding. Sometimes the healthiest response is quiet faithfulness. Continue serving. Continue loving. Continue growing. Continue praying. Continue trusting God. In time, fruit often speaks louder than arguments. Character often speaks louder than accusations. Consistency often speaks louder than rumors. And even if some people never change their minds, your peace does not have to depend on that outcome. Your worth has never been determined by hidden conversations. Your value has never depended on someone's opinion. Your identity is not created by rumor. It is rooted in the One who knows you completely. If that truth settles deeply in your heart, many fears begin losing their power. Because you realize something important. God already knows the full story. Nothing has surprised him. Nothing caught him unprepared. Nothing has removed you from his care. So wherever you are today, keep walking faithfully. Keep choosing integrity. Keep seeking wisdom. Keep trusting God's timing. The conversations of people may come and go, but God's faithfulness remains. And that is a foundation strong enough to build a life upon. There are seasons when the greatest struggle is not what happened to you, but what happened inside you because of it. You begin to question yourself. You wonder whether you should have spoken more. Whether you should have stayed silent. Whether you trusted the wrong people. Whether your kindness was mistaken for weakness. Those questions can echo in your mind long after the moment has passed. Yet Scripture repeatedly reminds us that God is concerned not only with the events of your life but with the condition of your heart as you walk through them. That is why some of the deepest victories are invisible. They happen when resentment could have taken root, but forgiveness begins to grow instead. They happen when pride could have taken over, but humility remains. They happen when fear whispers that you should give up, but faith quietly keeps moving forward. No one may applaud those moments. No crowd may celebrate them. But heaven values what is formed in secret. Think about David once more. Before he stood before Goliath, he stood alone in the fields. No audience watched him care for sheep. No kingdom recognized his faithfulness. Yet those hidden years became preparation for a public calling. It is tempting to believe that only visible moments matter. But God often shapes his people in places that nobody else notices. Maybe you feel like your efforts have gone unseen. Maybe you have continued to do what is right while wondering if it makes any difference. Keep going. Faithfulness is never wasted. Every decision to honor God, even when it costs you something, becomes part of the story He is writing. Sometimes the greatest breakthrough is not a dramatic change in circumstances. Sometimes it is discovering that your peace no longer depends on circumstances at all. Imagine how freeing that is. To wake up without carrying yesterday's accusations. To stop measuring your worth by someone's opinion. To recognize that your identity rests in God's love rather than public approval. That kind of freedom changes everything. Because people may continue to misunderstand you. Situations may not resolve as quickly as you hope. Questions may remain unanswered for a while. Yet your heart can remain steady. Not because life is perfect, but because your foundation is secure. Jesus spoke about building a house upon the rock. Storms still came. Rain still fell. Winds still blew. The difference was not the absence of storms. The difference was the strength of the foundation. That truth applies today. Everyone faces storms. Everyone encounters disappointment. Everyone experiences seasons of uncertainty. The question is where your confidence rests when those storms arrive. If it rests only in people, disappointment is inevitable. If it rests only in success, setbacks become overwhelming. If it rests only in circumstances, peace disappears whenever life changes. But when confidence rests in God's unchanging character, hope remains even during uncertainty. Perhaps that is exactly what this season has been teaching you. Not that people will always understand. Not that every door will immediately open. But that God's faithfulness remains steady through every chapter. There is wisdom in refusing to let disappointment define your future. Many people become trapped because they keep living inside an old conversation. They replay words that were spoken years ago. They continue fighting battles that already ended. They allow yesterday's wounds to shape today's decisions. God invites His people into something different. He invites them to move forward. Forward does not mean pretending the past never happened. Forward means refusing to let the past become your permanent address. The Apostle Paul understood this. He had every reason to dwell on regret. He had every reason to remain trapped by his past. Instead, he wrote about forgetting what lies behind and pressing toward what lies ahead. That is not easy. But it is freeing. You cannot fully embrace what God is doing today if your hands are constantly reaching backward. There comes a moment when healing requires releasing what you cannot change. Perhaps someone never apologized. Perhaps someone never admitted they were wrong. Perhaps someone still believes something untrue about you. You cannot control that. But you can decide whether those realities will continue controlling your peace. There is strength in surrendering those burdens to God. Not because justice does not matter, but because carrying constant anger eventually harms the one carrying it. God sees every hidden motive. He knows every truth. Nothing escapes His wisdom. Trusting Him means believing that His justice is wiser than our impatience. That trust does not remove every question overnight. But it allows your soul to rest. Rest is something many people desperately need. Not merely physical rest, but spiritual rest. The kind that comes from knowing you no longer have to prove your value every single day. The kind that comes from realizing God's love is not earned through perfect performance. The kind that comes from understanding that His grace reaches into places where human approval never could. That grace changes people. It softens hearts. It restores hope. It gives courage to begin again. If you have been carrying disappointment, hear this clearly. Disappointment does not have to become your identity. Failure does not become your identity. Misunderstanding does not become your identity. God's love speaks a deeper truth. Your life is bigger than one painful chapter. Your future is not limited to one difficult season. The same God who strengthened Joseph in prison, who walked with Daniel in Babylon, who encouraged Elijah in his exhaustion, and who restored Peter after failure is still faithful today. That does not mean every story unfolds the same way. It does mean that God remains present with His people. His presence often becomes the greatest gift of all. Because circumstances change. Success comes and goes. Recognition fades. But His faithfulness endures. So continue walking with integrity. Continue choosing honesty even when shortcuts seem easier. Continue speaking with kindness even when others choose harshness. Continue praying even when answers seem delayed. Continue trusting even when you cannot yet see the full picture. One day you may look back and recognize that what felt like a season of confusion was also a season of growth. That what seemed like delay became preparation. That what appeared to be silence became an opportunity to hear God's voice more clearly. Your story is still being written. Do not allow one difficult chapter to convince you the author has stopped writing. He has not. And as long as he continues writing, there is still reason to hope. Hope does not ignore reality. Hope simply believes that God is able to bring purpose even through circumstances we do not fully understand. So today, choose hope. Choose faith. Choose forgiveness. Choose perseverance. Not because those choices are always easy, but because they lead toward the kind of life that reflects the heart of Christ. And perhaps, years from now, someone else who feels misunderstood will hear your story and discover the courage to keep going because you chose to trust God even when the path ahead was unclear. That is how faith continues from one generation to the next. One faithful step. One prayer. One act of obedience. One day at a time. And sometimes, that is more than enough. There is another lesson that often goes unnoticed. When people misunderstand you, there is a temptation to become someone you were never meant to be. You may feel pressure to defend yourself constantly. To explain every decision. To answer every criticism. To prove your heart to people who have already decided what they want to believe. That kind of pressure is exhausting. It slowly steals your joy because your attention shifts from walking with God to managing everyone's opinion. But there comes a moment when wisdom quietly whispers that not every accusation deserves a response. Jesus often answered sincere questions. Yet there were moments when he remained silent before false accusations. Not because he lacked the truth, but because truth does not always need to shout in order to remain true. There is a difference between defending your integrity and living in constant self-defense. One is rooted in wisdom. The other is rooted in fear. Fear asks, what if they never understand me? Faith asks, can I trust God even if they never do? That is a difficult question. Yet it is one that transforms the heart. Because the moment your peace no longer depends on universal approval, you begin to experience a deeper freedom. You begin to realize that your calling is too important to spend every day chasing every misunderstanding. Instead, your energy can be invested in becoming the person God is shaping you to be. Growth is rarely comfortable. A tree does not become strong during calm weather alone. Its roots grow deeper through seasons of wind. In the same way, spiritual maturity often develops through challenges that stretch our trust. Perhaps you have wondered why this season has felt so difficult. Why certain relationships changed. Why familiar places suddenly felt unfamiliar. Why people you trusted seemed distant. Sometimes those moments reveal who is willing to walk with you through every season. They also reveal how much of your confidence has been resting in people instead of God. That realization can be painful. But it can also become the beginning of something beautiful. Because God never removes false foundations without offering something stronger in their place. He invites us to build on His faithfulness, on His promises, on His presence. Those foundations remain steady when everything else feels uncertain. Remember Elijah after his great victory on Mount Carmel. One moment he witnessed God's power in remarkable ways. The next moment he found himself discouraged and afraid. Even faithful people experience exhaustion. Even courageous people have moments when they feel overwhelmed. Yet God did not abandon Elijah. He cared for him. He strengthened him. He reminded him that he was not alone. Perhaps someone listening today needs that reminder. You are not alone in your struggles. God sees the burdens you have carried quietly. He knows the prayers that never reached anyone else's ears. He understands the disappointments you never fully explained. His compassion is greater than your weariness. That does not mean every answer arrives immediately. But it does mean His presence remains available. Sometimes healing begins not when every circumstance changes, but when we finally allow ourselves to rest in God's care. There is strength in admitting that you cannot carry everything by yourself. There is wisdom in bringing your fears honestly before God. The Psalms are filled with prayers that express confusion, disappointment, joy, hope, gratitude, and longing. David did not hide his emotions from God. He brought them into God's presence. That is an invitation for us as well. You do not have to pretend that every day is easy. Faith is not pretending. Faith is trusting God with the reality of your heart. Maybe today your prayer is simple. Lord, help me trust you. Sometimes that is enough. God is not waiting for perfect words. He invites sincere hearts. As you continue moving forward, remember that every season teaches something valuable. The seasons of joy teach gratitude. The seasons of waiting teach patience. The seasons of disappointment teach dependence. The seasons of restoration teach hope. None of those lessons are wasted. They become part of the wisdom you carry into the future. One day, someone else may face a struggle similar to yours. Your testimony will not simply be about how circumstances changed. It will be about how God remained faithful while you walked through uncertainty. That testimony has power. Not because it makes you the hero, but because it points people toward the faithfulness of God. There are people who will never read a theology book, but they will notice the peace in someone who has endured hardship without losing hope. They will notice kindness that survives disappointment. They will notice forgiveness that refuses to become bitterness. They will notice humility that remains steady even after success. Those qualities reflect Christ. And they often speak louder than words. So if today you feel unseen, remember this. God's work in your life is not measured only by visible achievements. Sometimes His greatest work is happening within your heart. He is shaping your character. deepening your compassion, strengthening your faith, teaching you to love more freely, helping you release what you cannot control, preparing you for opportunities you cannot yet imagine. Trust that process. Not because every step is easy, but because the one leading you is faithful. The road ahead may still contain challenges. There may still be unanswered questions. There may still be moments when you wish people understood your story more completely. Yet you can continue walking with confidence. Not confidence in yourself alone, but confidence in the God who has promised never to leave his people. He has walked with believers through deserts and valleys, through prisons and palaces, through victories and failures, through tears and celebrations. His faithfulness has never depended on perfect circumstances, and it does not begin or end with yours. So keep your heart open. Keep your hands willing. Keep your eyes fixed on what is true. Choose gratitude even in small moments. Celebrate quiet blessings. Encourage those who are discouraged. Pray for those who have hurt you. Love with wisdom. Serve with humility. And trust that every act of faithfulness matters, even when nobody else notices. Because the God who sees in secret is never indifferent to the lives of his children. He knows where you have been. He knows where you are. And he knows where he is leading you. Hold on to that hope. Let it steady your heart. Let it guide your steps. And let it remind you that your story is not defined by hidden conversations, but by the enduring faithfulness of the one who walks with you through every season.